What's up, everyone? I'm Justin Burkoltz. Thank you for watching. It's time for another book review. This week, I am excited to return to the work of Christopher Dunn and his theory on the original function and purpose of the Great Pyramid. I recently reviewed his first book, The Giza Power Plant, and this one, Giza, the Tesla Connection, is a direct successor to that. So if you have not watched that video, go check it out. It's an incredible book. I definitely recommend at least watching my review before this one or before reading this book so that you'll understand the foundation he laid about his theory and how he thinks the Great Pyramid functioned. This is going to be a super interesting review, so stay tuned. Do me a quick favor, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that subscribe button. I really want to try and grow the channel as much as possible this year, and I need your help to make it happen. So thank you for that, and let's get back to the episode. All right, so I just got back from a trip to Costa Rica. It was amazing, and I did spend most of my time, at the beach in the rainforest and all that kind of great stuff, enjoying all the nature there. I highly recommend a trip if you've never been. I love it there. But I did also do some reading while I was there. So I finished a couple of incredible books. This one right behind me here by Graham Hancock called America Before. That review will be coming very soon. And I finished this one here by Christopher Dunn. So like I said, check out my review of his first book, The Giza Power Plant, before this one if you haven't already. But this book is basically his continuation of that theory. The Giza power plant was published in the late 1990s, but there has been a lot of new research and new discoveries in the Great Pyramid. So this book covers all of that new information and updates his theory and builds on it with all the new information that's come out in the 20 plus years since his first book. And I honestly think that this one really answered a lot of my questions that I had after reading the first book. And also, I just felt like Chris has improved his delivery and his writing style. It was just a really awesome book. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So I can't wait to get into all the details with you. So this is Giza, the Tesla Connection. So you might be asking, what does Tesla have to do with this? Well, Chris's theory is that the Great Pyramid of Egypt functioned as a kind of power plant or solid state electron harvester, which is just a fancy word for a specific type of power plant, and that he thinks that the work of Nikola Tesla can help us understand how the pyramid may have functioned. He thinks that Tesla was sort of rediscovering some of the physics and the electromagnetic and acoustical properties that were at work within the pyramid. So the Tesla connection is bringing Tesla's work to frame our view and perspective of the pyramid so that we can better understand it. It also focuses on the work of a scientist by the name of Friedemann Freund, who worked with NASA and with SETI, and his work understanding the phenomenon that's known as earthquake lights. And so we'll talk more about what that is a little bit later. But essentially, those are the two main people whose work is really represented in this book. And Chris Dunn, the author of the book, talks about how their work and their research can help us understand how the pyramid may have functioned more deeply and answer some of the questions that were left lingering after his first book. In the introduction to this book, Chris actually lays out kind of step by step what exactly is presented in this book. And so I just kind of want to read through his quick list here so that you can see what he's covering here and see if that might be interesting to you. So, it says, in this book, you will learn how, since the Giza power plant, his first book, was published, further explorations of the Queen's Chamber's southern and northern shafts have discovered evidence that supports their function as described in the power plant theory. In particular, There is explosive new evidence that was discovered in 2002, but languished in a desk drawer until 2021, when it was broadcast on Matt Simpson's Ancient Architects YouTube channel. What has been revealed fully supports the Giza power plant theory. Why this evidence has been hidden for so long is still an open question. Also, you will find an appendix by Brett Cohen, PhD, who provides a different perspective and formula for the generation of hydrogen in the Queen's chamber. Because in his original theory, he speculated that the two shafts that go almost all the way to the Queen's chamber would have held two different chemicals that were mixed in the Queen's chamber to produce hydrogen gas that then flowed up through the Grand Gallery into the King's chamber and was part of the whole process. Well, Chris presented a certain formula for producing hydrogen gas in his first book, which was hydrochloric acid and hydrated zinc to produce hydrogen gas. But he's saying in the appendix of this book, and I highly recommend that you read the appendices in this book because they are awesome. They're very technical. They're written by scientists and specialists in different fields. And that appendix in particular, it states that a different formula that could have been used, and there's evidence to support this, that it was used, was actually sulfuric acid instead of hydrochloric acid. And there's reasons and evidence to support that theory. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But that is number one on his list of what you will learn in this book. Number two, the discovery of scorch marks on the ceiling of the Grand Gallery, which supports the King's Chamber explosion hypothesis. While temples such as Dendera near Luxor had layers of soot that, when cleaned, revealed beautiful original paint and details, the ceiling of the Grand Gallery, when cleaned, revealed heat-affected areas burned into the limestone ratcheted ceiling. This is very interesting, and he has a picture in the back of the book that shows before and after, before they cleaned the Grand Gallery ceiling and afterward, and you can see that there are very specific scorch marks where it looked like some kind of material was burning in certain places there at one point in time and left marks that can still be seen today after they had cleaned away all the dirt and stuff from thousands of years. Number three, the results of further acoustic testing and key measurements related to specific frequencies within the Great Pyramid's chambers and shafts. Robert Vaughter's appendix will go into greater detail. Once again, read the appendices. Number four, you will learn the stunning significance of the large void discovered above the Grand Gallery during muography detection efforts by an international group of scientific institutions. Aerospace engineer Eric Wilson recognized immediately what this big void may have been created for and why it was discovered where it was. Also, his appendix is a paper he wrote and delivered to a conference of the AIAA. Another excellent appendices to the book. Number five, you will learn the recent Russian research regarding how the Great Pyramid focuses electromagnetic energy to the center of the pyramid near the King's Chamber. And lastly, number six, you will learn about the exhaustive research into the phenomenon known as earthquake lights by a team of NASA scientists and the significance of what is known as the Freund effect and how it relates to the function of the Giza power plant. He says here, above all those else on the list, the Freund effect is probably the most significant of all, for I believe that it is these natural phenomena that inspired the building of the pyramids in the first place. For those of you not familiar with the work of Tesla and Freund, I want to talk briefly about what aspects of their work apply to this book and how they might help us understand the Great Pyramid. So, Nikola Tesla famously had a project called the Wardenclyffe Tower. where he was building this tower, and it's a metal tower with a kind of dome on top. There's pictures of it you can find. I'll hopefully have one for you here on the screen. And this was his proposal for producing and transmitting wireless electrical energy that could be picked up by other devices. Very famously, he demonstrated that this was possible to wirelessly transmit energy by powering light bulbs without having anything wired to them, just by turning on a device that could transmit this electricity wirelessly nearby. So Tesla did prove that this was possible, and Christopher Dunn thinks that this may be what have been going on with the pyramid, that it may have been wirelessly transmitting electricity for the entire the civilization, I should say, of ancient Egypt to harness and use. Now, we don't know what exactly they were using it for, but there is evidence that they had large machines of some kind that were cutting granite and other stone. For example, there's evidence that they had very large saws that were being used to cut through stone, and that those saws were powered by some kind of machine. And so the wireless energy that was being produced and transmitted from the pyramid could have been used by stone cutting machines. But then there's the question of, well, how did they power the machines that cut the stones for the Great Pyramid? All good questions. I'm not claiming to know the answer to any of that. However, that's what he's talking about here with the Tesla connection, is the transmission of wireless energy. There's also another part of Tesla's work that comes into play here, which is what is known as the earthquake machine. So it's stated that Tesla did some kind of experiment where he had a device that was hydraulic or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how it worked, but essentially it had a piston that would thud against a surface at a specific frequency, rate of vibration. And that if you matched that to the natural resonant frequency of the building or of a structure, you could get the entire structure to vibrate, faster, and you could build acoustic and mechanical energy within a structure like that. And Chris proposes that there was some kind of machine in the subterranean chamber under the Great Pyramid that was doing this, that was kind of kick-starting this whole acoustic machine by providing an initial thrust into the ground under the pyramid that would build, and then all of the other design of the pyramid was built to amplify those vibrations. Okay, so that's the Tesla part, the two parts of Tesla's work that come into play in this book. The work of the NASA team and Friedemann and Freund is different, and it talks about what happens to igneous rock when it is subjected to stress. Now, a lot of people are familiar with what's known as the piezoelectric effect, where when quartz crystals are subjected to dynamic forces like movement, like shaking or compressing and releasing, that they produce electricity. That's not what's going on with Freund and his research and the effect that he's discovered or expressed. So if you remember, quartz crystals that are subjected to movement like shaking or compression and decompression, so there's some dynamic stresses going on, will create electricity, but that's not what Freund did. So in Freund's research, he actually had a granite slab, like a rod almost of granite, and in one end he had a hydraulic press, and he pressed that end. Okay, he had the press add pressure and then locked, and there was a static load of pressure on the granite. Okay, it wasn't pressing and releasing, it wasn't shaking, there was no movement and no additional force applied once the initial force was applied on one end of the granite. On the other end of that granite rod, he attached a copper piece with a machine that could measure electric currents flowing out of it. And they measured electric currents flowing through that granite for a very long time. I believe they left it going for a matter of a few months. And electricity continued to flow without any additional movement or force added. Okay, so this is a totally different effect. And honestly, there is an appendix here in the book that talks about it, and it's a little over my head. Yeah, he says that there is what's called peroxy defects in the stone, and that's because of those defects, when pressure is applied, it causes electrons to flow in a certain direction through the stone. You can also see a picture there of the granite rod that I was talking about with an electrode on the end and the hydraulic clamp on the other end. And the way that Freund discovered this was that they were observing a phenomenon known as earthquake lights. So over fault zones, there are typically a mountain range near a fault zone, which is the highest points, of land in that area. And when pressures build up deep in the earth from the tectonic plates, grinding together and compressing the rock down there, electricity flows all the way through that rock to the highest point and is released on the tops of these mountain ridges near the fault lines as balls of lightning and other cool effects that kind of look like UFOs and stuff. Maybe some events in the past were these effects that people were seeing. And there's a lot of other interesting phenomenon that occurs because of the electromagnetic fields that are created by these stresses in the rocks deep underground. And what he proved through his research is that you could predict earthquakes based on this electromagnetic activity. So they could observe with satellites and other devices these areas, and if they saw electricity building up or being released, they could let a nearby town know, hey, you need to evacuate, an earthquake is going to happen in a couple of days, rather than, hey, an earthquake's going to happen right now, which is kind of how our current technology works. We don't get a lot of heads up with the seismography and those kinds of devices for detecting earthquakes. So how does that tie into the Great Pyramid? Well, Chris is proposing that the ancient Egyptians surveyed the site of the Giza plateau, found that it was an area where this phenomenon was naturally occurring, and decided to build an artificial mountain range there to amplify and harness this natural effect. And if you look at the Giza plateau, you have 3 giant pyramids. They are artificial mountains, unlike really anything else on Earth. There are pyramids elsewhere and stuff, not of that size and grandeur and stuff, and they're not, designed the same way. But the pyramids on the Giza plateau appear to be perfect for harnessing some kind of natural electromagnetic phenomena, whether that's exactly as Chris describes it or not. It seems like there was some consideration for these natural phenomena when they designed and built the site. Now, Chris thinks that they selected this area because they were able to observe and monitor maybe earthquake lights already coming out of the plateau, and then they leveled it, built these pyramids so that now those are the highest points. They're giant mountains of stone. So they would act just like the giant natural mountains of stone, and the electrical currents would flow up from deep in the earth through them towards the top and be released into the atmosphere or into some kind of dome that might have possibly existed or something like that to be harnessed wirelessly. And the earthquake machine in the bottom of the subterranean chamber under the Giza plateau could possibly have, enhanced this whole effect and kind of started it up artificially, even when it wasn't naturally happening. So when there weren't natural forces in the earth causing this to happen by tectonic movement, you could artificially create it by having a giant pyramid and something underneath that causes it to vibrate and subject the stones inside of it to certain pressures. It could have been from the buildup of the gas and heat and stuff that was going on inside there as well, along with those vibrations, to make this whole thing work. One of the appendices here, Appendix A, talks about this in a little more detail, and it says that Freund's research repeatedly comments on the subtle forces necessary to release significant energy from within granite. Lab tests have shown forces roughly equivalent to a hand hit or a foot stomp are enough to trigger the release of energy in granite. Since the breaking of bonds and the ensuing current flows all occur at quantum energy levels, the range of motion necessary to achieve this release of energy is measured in angstroms. A major variable to consider here is the stunning speed of sound in granite, which is approximately 13,300 miles per hour, compared to 767 miles per hour for the speed of sound in air. Since sound is a pressure wave, the faster the speed, the harder it impacts any object in its path. The effect of this dramatic difference here is worthy of contemplation. Given that there are literally thousands of tons of granite in the upper chambers, one intriguing question remains to be tested. Can sound vibrations, properly tuned to the resonance of large granite blocks, actually vibrate the granite enough to release the energies? This book is super fascinating, and there are so many things that I just learned and that I thought were really interesting throughout the book. I could probably talk forever, but I don't want this video to be too long. There are just a couple other points that I think are very interesting and that I want to cover before I finish this up. One of those is some research he talks about in here. It's kind of tangential to what's going on, but I found to be absolutely fascinating. And that is the effect of the electromagnetic fields that are created in these areas with the earthquake light and electricity phenomenon going on. It creates specific types of electromagnetic fields that have very specific effects on consciousness, and not just the consciousness of humans, but animals as well. There's research that's discussed in this book where animals start displaying weird behavior when these fields are created shortly before earthquakes. And this has been documented for so long that some cultures actually learn to predict earthquakes based on the behavior of animals around them. I believe in Japan this was the case. And it may have been the case in ancient Egypt as well. Who knows? But it's very interesting. There was a team that went around and studied the effects on consciousness that these fields can cause, and they can cause what we would describe as mystical experiences. And it's also well documented that a lot of sacred sites throughout the ancient world were built over fault lines in active fault zones, and in areas where these fields would have been created, and that people in those spaces found those places to be sacred because they had mystical and spiritual experiences while there. Well, that could have very well been caused by this phenomenon that Freud talks about in his research. And so I think there's a really interesting area to explore here, looking at ancient sites, religious sites, and other sites that are based around active fault areas, and analyzing the electromagnetic fields that we see there and how they affect consciousness. And I think that's something that we could possibly replicate in a lab setting and test scientifically, just like people are testing psychedelics like psilocybin and how they can occasion or induce mystical and spiritual experiences, or the effects of magnetic interventions that help with things like depression by altering consciousness. I think that in these places, some of the magical effects and experiences that people report having, say, inside the Great Pyramid, may be due to this effect. And Chris states so as well, and he actually lists a number of direct, anecdotes that he's gathered from people he's talked to personally who have told him about strange spiritual and mystical experiences that they had inside the Great Pyramid. So this is something I found super fascinating, and I hope that people look further into it in the future. Here's a quick quote here from the book where Chris is actually quoting another author here. Let's see. His name is Danley. Last name Danley. What's his first name? Tom Danley, who is writing about the pyramid, and he says, the effects of LF sound, low-frequency sound, were extensively studied by various government agencies to determine the effects on humans, partly for the space program. One of the things that was discovered is that infrasound, very low frequency, can affect one's brainwave activity and other biological functions. If, as some suggest, these pyramids were constructed as a temple or for an initiation ritual rather than a tomb, then the low-frequency sounds may be deliberate and have served a sacred purpose, with the sound triggering and even forcing changes in brainwave state. Now, like I said, even if they weren't constructed to be initiation chambers initially, they may actually have that effect just because of what's going on there, and maybe they were reused for that purpose by later generations that didn't know how to restore them to their original function. It certainly seems that people today who enter into the king's chamber, especially people who lay inside the so-called sarcophagus there, describe all sorts of spiritual experiences, powerful experiences going on. Another great quote about this whole effect is from Igor Florensky here, and Chris quotes him from a paper. It looks like it's titled Earthquake Lights in Legends of the Greek Orthodoxy. And it states that they studied a stereotype of earthquake light interpretation in the legends of the Greek Orthodoxy, exemplified by the legends about the foundation of two shrines, St. George Monastery near the Cape Fiolant, Crimea, and the Panagia Tripoti Church in Aegean, Peloponnese, I think. Probably butchered that pronunciation. But it is argued that the similar interpretation of earthquake light observation in the Crimean and Peloponnesian legends were caused by similar natural and economic living conditions of the Greek population in both regions in the Middle Ages. So as we also consider some examples of earthquake light observation that took place in other regions and their interpretation in other denominations. Differences and relations between earthquake light of mechanico-electrical and degassing origin are discussed. Finally, we consider the role of active faults in the production of a mystical experience and sacralization of an affected landscape. This was one of the things that I found absolutely fascinating, like I was saying. What is really going on in these ancient sacred sites? People were having powerful mystical experiences. Were they possessed by spirits, demons, gods? Were they communicating with higher intelligences? Or were they experiencing natural electromagnetic or outgassing phenomenon based on natural phenomena that occur near fault lines? It also says here that those who have not visited the pyramids and have not enjoyed that experience, when understanding that there is an explanation based on physics and science, will be able to understand that it's not all due to an overactive imagination or in the head of the human being affected, but that the source for this stimulation is in the earth and the pyramid itself. And very importantly, Chris ends the book in the last chapter, explores the question of, could we rebuild a new Great Pyramid? Could we build a solid state electron harvester that harnesses these natural phenomenon to produce and transmit wireless electricity? And what would it take to actually build a Great Pyramid? And he has a whole chapter on this at the end of the book. Chapter 9, The Ultimate and New Green Energy Machine. And the logistics of financing, of quarrying, of building a Great Pyramid are discussed in length. And let's just say it would be an unbelievable project, the size of which, the like of which, we really can barely even comprehend. I mean, it's absolutely massive construction just to build one Great Pyramid, but the Giza Plateau has 3 giant pyramids on it and a lot of other stuff going on under the ground as well, and I think it's all connected. This would have been a absolutely insane project. It just doesn't make sense that a project of that magnitude, of that cost, that would take who knows how many decades to complete, would be for a magical or ceremonial or ritual purpose. There had to have been a return on investment to the civilization that built it, whether that was wireless energy or whether it was the production of certain chemicals to create fertilizer and terraform the Sahara. I don't know. There are some very interesting theories, and hopefully we'll get to explore those theories more on this channel. All right, well, I know that's a lot. This book is so interesting, and I didn't even get into the acoustical science that it covers. There's so much interesting information here. I learned about all kinds of different things: chemistry, acoustics, the whole Freund effect and earthquake lights, the Tesla technology and discoveries that he discusses. All of this is super fascinating. And once again, even if he's totally wrong about the pyramid, he provides us with a possible way to build much greener energy production power plants or technology than anything that exists today. And I think we should really look further into these effects and into this research and maybe change the way that we produce and distribute energy. I mean, it's one of the most destructive things that we do to the planet today. And I think we really need something better than the so-called green energy technology that we've had. It's not good enough. It's just not cutting it. We need something better. And this book possibly tells us how to do that. So I think it's super important. And honestly, a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me and who are, specialists in all these fields agree. And they, wrote papers and all kinds of, appendices and stuff for Chris for this book. So it's not just Chris's opinions here in this book. He quotes a ton of people who are specialists in their field. I highly recommend picking it up, reading it for yourself if you're interested in this at all, or if you're just interested in ancient Egypt and all the mysteries that are there, because there are a lot of mysteries. The archaeologists and historians will try to tell you they know that, the pyramids are tombs for Khufu and Khafre and Menkaure, etc. But it's just seeming like that's very unlikely. All right, well, if any of that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend picking up a copy of the book. There's a link below in the description. It is an Amazon affiliate link, so if you do click on that and buy a copy of the book, a small portion of the proceeds will go to me to help buy more books and maintain my channel and all of that good stuff. if you want to support me. Otherwise, subscribing, liking, all of that really helps me out. My main goal is just to grow the channel, to promote reading and to promote, open-mindedness and different perspectives, and dispel ignorance, and prejudice. And so I try to cover things that are very interesting, sometimes very controversial, with an open mind, and without trying to debunk or discredit or anything like that. I'm just trying to understand their perspectives, their theories, and I've learned a lot of really cool stuff along the way, so I know you will as well. All right, well, thank you for watching. If you want to support me further, I do have a couple of books over here that I've published myself on spirituality, spiritual practices, and protocols for really developing yourself and your life. And if you want to support me and you can buy a copy of those books, I am eternally grateful. All right, I'll see you guys next week.